Hello, everyone, and welcome to Solar Alberta's 2021 seminar series. Today, we're going to be learning about Edmonton's energy transition strategy and climate action plan. We were delighted to have so many people register for this event. Please note that we will be recording this webinar for future distribution so that those who missed out on registering through Zoom can still participate. My name is Heather McKenzie, and I am the Executive Director of Solar Alberta. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge that I'm hosting you today from Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place and home of many Indigenous peoples, including Nehiyawak or Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Papas Chase, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, and Métis, nations whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries. Today, we will be hearing from two speakers, and then following their presentations, we will be taking some time for a Q&A period in which you can all participate. Throughout the event and after, you are encouraged to give us a shout out on social media using #SolarAlberta. We will be using Zoom Q&A for questions rather than the chat box, so please enter your questions in the Q&A section. You should be able to click on that section in your Zoom toolbar. You can upvote good questions that others have asked or post some of your own. The questions that are voted up will show up at the top of the list, and we will be pulling primarily from those for the moderated Q&A, as we likely won't have time for all questions. And now, just a little bit about Solar Alberta. Did you know this is Solar Alberta's 30th year of operation? Solar Alberta is a not-for-profit society that is dedicated to public education about renewable energy and energy efficiency. We also serve as a hub for the solar industry here in Alberta and connect the general public to industry providers through our solar industry directory and our Alberta Solar Map, as well as our regular events and much more. We are pleased to have launched our annual solar seminar series online this year and have found that this venue is making our programming accessible to folks from many walks of life. We are offering a number of webinars on Thursdays over the lunch hour between now and October. You can find archived videos of our previous webinars on our website as well. We are currently accepting registrations for our May 20th event, at which we will learn about Fort Chippewan's road to a lower carbon energy mix. And we're also accepting registrations for our June 3rd utility scale solar event about Alberta as the solar powerhouse of Canada. We are always interested in developing more partnerships for our events. If you or your company want to work with us to educate the public about the benefits of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate change, please don't hesitate to reach out. Also, if you would like to support the work of Solar Alberta in general, please watch for our latest 50/50 fundraiser. We're going to be launching that any minute today or tomorrow. So you can watch for that on our Facebook or LinkedIn profiles, as well as Twitter. This entire series is free and open to the public, thanks to the generous support of our members, volunteers, and financial supporters. We are very pleased and grateful to have the City of Edmonton's Change for Climate as the premium sponsor for this Lunch and Learn event. Before we get started today, we just want to launch a brief poll to help us get a sense of who has joined and what your level of familiarity is with the City of Edmonton's energy transition strategy. We're going to launch a poll now, and if you could please take a minute to fill that out, we'd really appreciate it. There we go. Seeing some responses flooding in. Great. All right. We're close to a fully subscribed poll. So once we get all the way there, we'll share the results with you. All right, Lorraine, if you wouldn't mind sharing those results now. It looks like we have quite a few of you who are somewhat familiar. 53%. We've got a good contingent of folks who are brand new to the energy transition strategy, and a handful of you who are very familiar. So hopefully that will be some helpful information for our presenters today. Thanks very much. All right, now time for some introductions, my favorite part of the presentation. We are pleased to have with us today two engaging presenters. First up, well, actually, second up, we're going to have Lisa Dockman. Lisa is an energy transition project manager with the Energy Transition Unit at the City of Edmonton. Her work focuses on the planning and implementation of initiatives that mitigate energy use and greenhouse gas emissions associated with Edmonton's residential sector. Some of the programs she has developed include Edmonton's Home Energy Retrofit Accelerator, Corporate Climate Leaders Program, and Building Energy Benchmarking Program, and more. Lisa is a University of Alberta alumnus of both the Faculty of Science and the Faculty of Education, in addition to being a lead Green Associate and a certified professional facilitator with the International Association of Facilitators. Previously, she worked at the University of Alberta's Office of Sustainability, delivering a suite of educational programs and capacity building initiatives for students, faculty, and staff. She has over 10 years of experience planning and implementing and evaluating sustainability-focused strategic planning and change management campaigns. Lisa is passionate about collaborative program planning, facilitating engagement in sustainability initiatives, and equipping people with the capacity to accomplish sustainable change. So welcome, Lisa. We're delighted to have you with us today. I should say welcome back because you were with us for the solar show and we appreciated that very much. And here you are again. And today we have first up in our presenters list is Danielle Kaleak. Danielle is an environmental project manager with the City of Edmonton, where she works on developing and implementing climate change strategies, policies, and programs. Danielle has over 10 years of experience in the environmental planning field with a background in environmental science and a master's in environmental design. Welcome, Danielle. We're really pleased to have you here with us today. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Danielle. She's going to begin the presentations, and I'll be back once the presentations are concluded to facilitate the Q&A. Just a reminder to make sure you're populating the Q&A throughout. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just present here. Okay, there we go. So hi, everyone. You should all be able to see my screen and hear me. I will let someone flag for me if you can't. So as mentioned, my name is Danielle and I work for the City of Edmonton on climate change planning. And I'm here today to talk about Edmonton's updated energy transition strategy and action plan that was just approved by our City Council in April of this year. And then, as mentioned, I will hand it over to my colleague Lisa, who will talk in more detail about current energy transition programs. So first thing I want to just address is 1.5, which I have removed from this slide. And I just want to take a moment to explain why I did that. And this is probably not new to most of you. I saw a lot of the poll results. People are somewhat or very familiar with our strategy. So some of what I'm speaking to today will not be new for you, but hopefully it still is interesting. But anyways, to go back to the 1.5, so the Paris Agreement is an international treaty on climate change that came into effect in November of 2016. It holds countries accountable to make significant efforts to prevent global temperatures from rising under 2 degrees Celsius and preferably to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial temperatures. In 2019, Edmonton City Council voted to declare a state of climate emergency in Edmonton and requested that our existing energy transition strategy be updated to reflect this urgency. So that kind of translated into us talking internally as teams around the 1.5 strategy. But really 1.5 doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to everyone. So I'm going to refer to it as what it really is, and that is our Edmonton's Community Energy Transition Strategy and Action Plan. Or I'll just call it strategy because that's quite a mouthful. But the revised strategy and action plan was endorsed by City Council just last month. So it's relatively, I'd say, hot off the presses and new. And it reflects a greater sense of urgency with an accelerated action plan. And that's what I am talking about today. So I probably don't really have to go through this with you folks, but I do just want to mention some key points as to why this work is so important. Most of my work actually has been in the field of climate change adaptation, so making sure that we are prepared and resilient to the risks and impacts that a changing climate will have on us. And this work has identified certain climate change risks that Edmonton needs to be prepared for, including an increased risk of urban flooding, more frequent and intense weather events, an overall warming trend in our region, and a possible change in our ecosystems. A high-level economic study for Edmonton also has indicated that for every degree of overall warming, there are real economic and social costs for us. So it's really important that we work to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to try to minimize these changing climate risks and impacts. So I think we all know that mitigating greenhouse gas emissions is important for several reasons, but we also see there being possible economic opportunities for Edmonton with the energy transition. And our strategy was developed with that in mind, hopefully capitalize on these economic opportunities. So before I get into the strategy itself, I just thought it would be prudent to touch on work that is already underway from the city of Edmonton. And the updated strategy has not gotten in the way of this important work continuing. So on this slide here, I've just listed some of those key pieces of work that are ongoing as part of our energy transition. Okay, so let's just get into what our revised strategy and action plan is. So it's a 10-year strategy with 105 bold actions, but don't worry, I am not going through all of those today. That would be, don't have time for that. But really, it sets Edmonton on a path to meeting our 30-year vision for greenhouse gas reduction. So I'll just talk a bit about our current greenhouse gas emissions inventory, because of course our greenhouse gas emissions profile was used to inform kind of those big areas that we are targeting for reductions. So Edmonton's current emissions profile can be grouped into kind of three big buckets. The two blue slices of the pie chart are our building sector. So that's residential and commercial institutional. And they make up about 35% of our community greenhouse gas emissions today. The green wedge at the bottom is transportation, which makes up about 30% of emissions. That gray wedge is industrial emissions within our city boundaries, and those make up 30% as well. And then you can see this small yellow wedge there is waste emissions, and that's about 1%. So as part of revising our strategy, we looked at how far and how fast we have to move in terms of emissions reductions and how far off from that trajectory we are with our previous strategy. So our previous strategy had us on a trajectory that is the light blue line at the top of the graph. And we learned that meeting Edmonton's local carbon budget to stay within our share of the 1.5 degree warming requires rapid reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and carbon neutrality by 2050. And that's similar to the trajectory of the dark blue line at the bottom of that graph. So based on our work, we modeled that we can get about 25% of the needed reductions from transportation, that's the dark blue wedge in that pie chart. We can get about 20% from our buildings and our urban design and planning, and about 35% from greening our energy systems. And that leaves us with about a 15 to 20% gap. And these are reductions that we need to get from carbon capture technology, nature-based solutions, or offsets. So these emissions reduction categories are really where we focused our strategy on. And again, I think just keeping in mind that this is a municipal strategy. And so it was of course focused on those areas that a city in Alberta would have some level of control or influence or play in. So our revised community strategy has these 4 climate pathways, which I'll talk about a lot through my presentation. So renewable and resilient energy transition, emissions neutral buildings, low carbon city and transportation, and then carbon capture and nature-based solutions. And those again correspond to those big kind of buckets of our emissions profile. And then we also have an underlying foundation of climate solutions leadership. And this is really all about the city's own operations, taking action and being leaders in greenhouse gas reduction. I want to note as well that embedded throughout all these pathways is the need to do this in a just and equitable way and in a way that would maximize economic development. And in that way, the revised strategy will hopefully help us contribute to multiple city building goals and objectives. So we've also updated our targets to accelerate our GHG emissions reduction goals. As you can see, we have interim targets to 2025 and 2030, with an overall goal of achieving net zero per person GHG emissions by 2050. I should note as well that net zero per person is also a target embedded in City Plan. And City Plan is our statutory municipal development plan and transportation master plan. So that is a really kind of critical guiding and statutory document that guides all the urban development in Edmonton. So having that target embedded in City Plan really paves the way for us to take action on this target in multiple city building ways. Okay, so how are we going to get there? So I'm going to go through high-level parts of our strategy. And again, for those of you that are very familiar or even somewhat familiar, this won't be new to you, but I hope it's still interesting. But first, I just want to talk briefly about the implementation approach that we have embedded into our strategy, because I think it's actually a really important thing to keep in mind as I'm going through this, to recognize that, details of programs and actions and what lever of change we are using will depend on the context. So for example, if there are funding opportunities from other orders of government that we want to take advantage of, or technology advancements, those types of things. So indicators and signals will be determined that we will monitor to identify when we would, for example, enter, exit, or change an approach. And I just thought it would be helpful to keep this implementation approach in mind, to understand that it is a gated and staged implementation, and it will hopefully allow for flexibility and adaptability if there are changes in our context. Okay, so I'm going to go through the highlights of the updated strategy now. Again, I am going through high-level information and not a ton of detail, just given the time and everything like that. But I want to give the highlights and really introduce you, I think, to our approach to this new energy transition strategy. So each of our pathways has goals, and these are those really, high-level outcomes that we want to achieve. And then under each goal, we have various strategies to get to those goals. And our strategies are aggregated groupings of the tactics or our actual detailed actions. So I'm just going to go over some of those high-level points. So on this slide, you can see I have the goals for the first two pathways. And you can also see that other city building outcomes are embedded in these goals as well, besides energy transition and climate resilience. So just to talk to you kind of about the goals of what our big outcomes are. So the first path is, again, this energy transition path. And this allows us really to reimagine where our energy comes from and the future energy markets that we can lead. We know that Edmonton and Alberta are home to some of the world's best energy innovators, and we can use our strengths to lead this transition. We also have, of course, emissions neutral buildings. And I believe we've defined this as an emission neutral building is one that is highly energy efficient and uses only renewable energy. So Edmonton is home to, a lot of expertise in sustainable building practices and green building technologies. So that's something that we can also capitalize on and use to our advantage. But this pathway is also about trying to save Edmontonians and businesses money by lowering their energy bills. There are, I believe, roughly, 74,200 energy poor households, meaning that the household is unable to maintain adequate access to energy services at a reasonable cost. And so this pathway is about trying to improve overall affordability, while also hopefully creating some of those local green building job opportunities, and ultimately reducing our greenhouse gas emissions from our building sector. So next, we have low carbon city and transportation. So many of our city planning decisions that we make today will lock in infrastructure development patterns and corresponding environmental impacts for decades to come. So the urban landscape and neighborhood development patterns, such as density and corresponding transportation options, directly influence our greenhouse gas emissions. Edmonton's future urban development and redevelopment and the implementation of City Plan will play a key role in meeting our climate change mitigation goals. And urban planning practices, of course, influence how we move about our city. So this pathway is also about planning for mobility. On the transportation side, it's really about reducing vehicle kilometers traveled first by trying to increase active and public transportation mode share, and then helping the transition to electric or zero emission vehicles. Fourthly, we have this carbon capture and nature-based solutions. And again, this is looking at actions that actively remove carbon from the atmosphere. So nature-based solutions, a simple example of that might be tree planting, for example. They help support attractive and healthy urban places while also removing carbon. So again, it's achieving those multiple city building goals and kind of win-win. But this pathway also looks at technological options for capturing carbon storage and the possibility of offsetting emissions. So those are those high level goals and outcomes that, of course, we have to translate down into actionable items. I'm not going to be able to get into all of the strategies under each goal or all of the actions in our action plan because of time, and it would probably be quite boring to listen to me just read them all out. But I'm going to go through each milestone we have for each path along our way to 2050 carbon neutrality. And I'm going to flag for you what we're calling big win actions, those big things that are going to make a big difference in the next decade, just to give some examples of the actions in each of the different pathways, bearing in mind this is a 10-year action plan, and I'm not getting into all the details. But for our renewable and resilient energy transition path, some of the big wins included here are around a citywide district energy network, piloting a hydrogen heated neighborhood, scaling up our renewable electricity installations through expanded incentive programs, looking at group or aggregated renewable energy purchasing, and then 100% renewable energy for our own city operations. Our next path on buildings, so this includes both a focus on new builds as well as on retrofits of our existing building stock. Some of the big wins here include an accelerated and expanded home energy retrofit program, a home renovation program to address energy poverty, and an emissions neutral building standard for new City of Edmonton buildings. A low carbon city and transportation, I do want to point out that a lot of our actions here, as I've talked about already, are aligned to other city building outcomes as outlined in city plan and other strategic documents like our bike plan. But in some cases, certain actions are on a more accelerated timeline in our energy transition strategy. So big wins that we've identified here include things like implementing city plan, which includes a lot of policy intentions for low carbon city development, such as 15-minute districts, limiting outward growth, taking a nodes and corridor approach to urban development, those types of things. Other big wins in this pathway include a citywide active transportation network, a citywide zero emission vehicle charging network, and zero emissions transit system and fleet. And then last path is around this active removal of carbon and carbon sequestration. So this pathway really imagines a future where we cost effectively remove carbon from the atmosphere using innovative technology, but also nature-based solutions that really help us to cultivate a healthier city. Some of the big win actions here include an accelerated tree planting program, an expanded and accelerated conservation and restoration of urban ecosystems, and a conservation offset program and expanded CO2 infrastructure. So those are really those big highlights and those big wins that we're looking at. Lastly, we have this foundation to take leadership on climate solutions. And this includes big wins like becoming a carbon neutral corporation, developing an integrated carbon and financial accounting framework. This will help us prioritize actions based on real carbon accounting and carbon budget estimates, and a clean energy improvement financing program. One other thing I do want to point out is our new council policy on climate resilience that we took forward to council for approval the same time as this strategy. I know you can't read that on the slide. That's not the expectation, but I just wanted to point out that this is a new kind of expanded policy to look at climate resilience, so mitigation and adaptation holistically. And it includes 3 policy commitments to immediately and urgently act to reduce emissions. And in that policy statement, it actually embeds our strategy emissions reduction targets into this council policy. So that will help us as a corporation kind of make it a bit easier to action and operationalize those targets. The second policy commitment is to act to adapt, prepare for and respond to a changing climate. So that's, that climate adaptation and resilience piece. And then finally, to lead climate solutions and service delivery and corporate management. And that's really getting into what our city as a corporation is doing. So I mentioned the goals, the pathways under, or the pathways, the goals under those pathways, and then some of those big milestones along our path to 2050 carbon neutrality and our big win actions. Again, I keep in mind there are multiple strategies within each goal and 105 actions. So I just went over those really big highlights. I just want to point out that we know this plan does come with a large price tag, and it will require investment by other orders of government and the private sector, in addition to City of Edmonton. And lastly, I just want to touch again on the implementation approach and our next steps. So we are aligning with our city plan implementation approach, and we've identified different what we term at the city levers of change that we will use to act, and that will depend on the action we are taking. So we are already taking our next steps towards implementing this new strategy. So for example, the Carbon Budget Office is currently being set up in order to develop and implement this carbon accounting framework and track our carbon budgeting. We will likely be asking, for more funding from council in next budget cycles. We are setting up how to apply a just and equitable lens into the program and action development. And we are currently working with some of those big land use planning areas to integrate energy and climate features into them. So that includes our district planning group, our zoning bylaw, those sorts of things. So while we are continuing to implement actions under the previous strategy, now that this one has been approved, we are adjusting those actions to be aligned with this new strategy. Again, we'll be relying on that gated implementation approach, and we'll be identifying signals for when we have to further adjust, enter, exit specific actions, that sort of thing. And I just want, to close again on saying, like this, we are beginning implementation work, but we are just at the beginning because the strategy was only approved, I think, less than a month ago. So, there will be more things coming forward from us. So that's it from me. Again, I tried to cover a lot short amount of time. I apologize for those who know that all of this already, but I hope that there was at least something interesting there for you. And I will now pass it over to Lisa to speak in some more detail about programs. So take it away, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Wonderful, and a huge thank you to Solar Alberta for inviting us today and for all of you for joining. So really grateful for that update from Danielle on such exciting work, the revised Community Energy Transition Strategy. But we did want to take a couple minutes, as some of you may or may not be familiar with the energy transition programs that we currently have available to Edmontonians. So these programs have been launched and developed in accordance with the energy transition strategy that was approved in 2015 and have yet to be adapted and transformed to align with the newly approved strategy. So certainly look forward to that upcoming, but did want to take this opportunity to share some insights on where we are now. So I couldn't possibly, similar to Danielle, share everything that's happening as it relates to the many actions in our energy transition strategy. But I did want to point out, many people don't realize that we do publish an annual report on the implementation progress. And what's great about this is it does have, of course, the community programs, but it also has reporting on our corporate greenhouse gas emissions plans and activities. And it has, some of the other projects like the Blatchford and green electricity procurement and all kinds of other things that I would encourage you to take a look at if you're interested in that detail. So the 2019 version's available at edmonton.ca/green annual report, and then the 2021 should be available this fall. So our community programs within energy transition are organized by under Change for Climate, under different versions of our Change for Climate identity. So I'm going to start with Change Homes for Climate and share a couple examples, and then I'll move on to Change Business and then Change Mobility for Climate. So you may be familiar with HERA. So this is Edmonton's newest energy transition program, and it stands for the Home Energy Retrofit Accelerator. And this is a residential energy efficiency incentive program designed to facilitate home renovations that reduce carbon emissions, save energy, and support local renovation businesses. So really that local renovation business piece is that by incentivizing and encouraging residents to make their homes more energy efficient, there is all kinds of local economic benefits to that work, to the contractors and energy advisors that help with that work. So we know as economic recovery activities are really ramping up in all sorts of jurisdictions, that renovation, they're actually really fantastic because they're intensely local and do have a really great economic benefit. So this program helps achieve climate and economic outcomes. So for those of you who are interested in HERA, the program helps you understand your home's energy efficiency and then provides rebates for associated upgrades to improve it. So things like insulation, windows, water and space heating equipment, and others are eligible for rebates with a 20% bonus rebate for more significant retrofit projects. So if you undergo 3 projects or more, you get a bonus rebate on the entire suite. So really that's trying to encourage that kind of more comprehensive, deeper energy retrofits for homes. So participation starts with an EnterGuide home energy evaluation, which I'll speak more to in a moment. Homeowners then enroll using that label in the program. They then, should do a good amount of research to understand from our program user guide and eligible product and services list what the criteria are for different equipment to be eligible. So for example, what efficiencies are expected for furnaces or what certifications for a triple paned window, those kinds of things. And then integrate those into their plans and upgrades of their home. Then the actual application for rebates comes after the upgrades have taken place. It's a simple online form that can be filled out for up to 3 rebates at a time. And then there is always the option of getting a post-retrofit evaluation. So this is where the EnterGuide Energy Advisor comes back in to update your EnterGuide label and share some information about whether your renovations achieved what was intended. There is also a rebate within HERA for renovating to net zero. So when I say net zero, so this is a home that produces enough renewable energy to meet its own needs on an annual basis. So this is most often done with solar in an Edmonton context. And it means that essentially a home that's been renovated to net zero produces enough solar energy in the summer and shoulder months that it makes up for the electricity it needs to pull from the grid in the winter months. So if you're interested on a pathway to net zero and some discussion on that and this $10,000 rebate, I'd encourage you to watch this Lunchbox webinar recording. So to learn more about HERA, this is the program website, and you can see the URL at the top there. I encourage you to check that out. There's a robust FAQ section as well as the program user guide and the product and services eligibility list. Just briefly, because I know EnterGuide, many people are not familiar with it. So it's a rating system for buildings and consumer products. So you might recognize the logo at the bottom from things like your washing machine or your dishwasher. It's managed by the Government of Canada through Natural Resources Canada. And it also provides a rating, energy rating for homes. So it helps the homeowner understand how efficient their home is, how and where their house uses energy, and how they can improve it. And it's completed through a home energy evaluation that's 2 to 3 hours visit to the household. That includes a blower door test, and then also that uses the advice of an energy modeling tool used by your energy advisor to understand the efficiency of that home. So for example, here is the EnterGuide label for my home, and this is a photo of the blower door test. And what this is doing is lowering the pressure within the home to test the air tightness of the envelope of my home. And so that's really valuable to understand how and where your home is losing energy, and that helps inform the recommendations that are made in your EnterGuide renovation report. You'll see here that my home is using 164 gigajoules of energy a year whereas if my home was built to code today, it would be expected to use only 92 gigajoules. And also that the space heating, so my furnace is taking up 69% of my annual energy consumption, and this is including electricity and natural gas. So some really great learnings and some insights onto your home can be gained from this. Just briefly, you get a renovation upgrade report that also shares if I underwent certain specific upgrades, I could expect to only be using 70 gigajoules of energy a year, which is a significant change. And it actually outlines like an order and recommendations on what upgrades make the most sense for my home. So very valuable information, we believe. And then we have been running these kinds of rebate programs for EnterGuide labels since 2017. And you'll see, if you're interested, on our home energy map, just about 5,000 homes in the region have had their EnterGuide labels shared to really try and make that energy efficiency information of those homes available in the market. I did also want to share another homes program. So this one is the Residential Solar Rebate Program. And what this program is, first of all, what do I mean when I say solar? So in this case, we're talking about solar photovoltaic, which is solar PV. This is solar panels, often on rooftops, garages, or homes that generate electricity. So we're not necessarily talking about battery storage or off-grid, or even solar thermal, where you might use the sun's energy to heat water. We're specifically talking about for electricity. So for this program, the solar PV system must be compatible with the Government of Alberta's microgeneration regulation, which has some rules around how much like system capacity you can install. And it must be grid connected. So this means that the electricity first powers your house, but on any given date or time that you're not using the full amount being generated, it then flows into the grid and the homeowner receives credit on their utility bill for that. So this program provides a 40-cent per installed watt rebate for existing homes and buildings that are residential, and 30 cents for new homes and buildings that are residential, which is about 15% of the costs. So a really broad range of residential homes and building types are eligible. Rooftop or garage systems are encouraged. System expansions, however, are not. And there's a two-part application. So funds are held for 9 months if a system's pre-approved, and then there's a second part after the installation. And it is expected that you use an approved solar contractor, either from Solar Alberta or CanREA's lists of contractors. And then just briefly for rebate caps, a maximum of $4,000 per dwelling is the rebate cap for this program, or 40% of the system costs. And then each property owner or builder can only get a maximum of $50,000 per calendar year, which could include multiple projects. And then just to ensure that there is funding available for existing homes and buildings, no more than 50% of the annual budget will go to new construction projects. And for those of you that are interested, kind of interested in solar, but maybe not quite ready yet to talk to a solar installer and get a solar assessment of your home, we have partnered with MyHeat to provide this solar potential map. So would encourage you to check it out. This is also my home here. What you can see is, if you enter your address into this online platform, it shows you the anticipated performance of a solar system on your home. So how many panels you might be able to fit, the hours of available sunlight, and then actually, interestingly, the kinds of broad return on investment you might expect based on your utility bills. So some pretty interesting insights there. Before diving into the change buildings for climate, I did want to mention a couple things you may or may not be aware of. One is we know that the Government of Canada has a federal program launching soon called the Greener Homes Program. And this one is providing 1 million free EnterGuide audits nationwide, as well as 700,000 grants of up to $5,000 for homeowners to go through these kinds of energy efficiency upgrades. So I do encourage you to watch out for this one. The details we're expecting in sort of June. And, it's just a really great time to consider upgrades with both HERA and greener homes combined. And as some of you may know, we also have a new program on the horizon in Edmonton. So it's not available yet, but CEIP, or the Clean Energy Improvement Program, is a province-wide financing tool that Edmonton is working on opting into. And it's a financing tool that enables low-cost, long-term funding for renewable and energy efficiency upgrades to homes and buildings. And essentially, it pays for 100% of those project costs over the lifetime of that product. So in this case, up to 20 years. And then it's repaid through municipal property taxes. So it's a property tied financing tool. And so we do expect it to be available in August 2021. Keep your eyes peeled for that one. And then just finally on the residential front, we do have some pretty comprehensive resources that change habits for climate and change homes for climate. If you're interested, please check those out. There's lots of great information there. And then also Climate Resilient Home is a wonderful tool for understanding the sort of ways you might make your home more resilient in the face of a changing climate. For Change Buildings for Climate, so just briefly, this is programs that are focused on a commercial or business audience, as well as institutional buildings. So a program here that you or your work might be interested in is the Building Energy Benchmarking Program. So this is a program that does building level energy reporting, benchmarking, and optional disclosure for buildings over 10,000 square feet. It uses Energy Star Portfolio Manager as the tool to do that work. And there is also an energy audit rebate program for folks that might be interested in accessing that as well. That's optional. So the registration for any buildings that might be interested in this program is October 1st this year. So would encourage you to check that out if you're interested. And then there is a data sharing deadline. So the actual benchmarking takes place based on data that's shared about a month after. There's also the Building Energy Retrofit Accelerator program. So this program is a rebate program that similar to HERA, but for commercial and institutional buildings. Similarly, it encourages more significant retrofits through bundling and bonusing to take advantage of GHG reductions. And it's up to $150,000 in rebates per year with HVAC systems, lighting fixtures, building envelope, and green building certifications as examples of what's covered. And then the last business program to mention is the Corporate Climate Leaders Program. So this is a program that supports businesses and organizations that are committed to climate action and provides all sorts of capacity building and recognition for that work, but then commits them or supports them in their commitment to establish corporate GHG inventories, plans and targets, and shares some of that publicly. So currently there are 56 members in this program, but we are in just the final stages of recruiting cohort 4. So while the deadline has passed, there's still some space to register for this program if your business or organization might be keen. And I would encourage you to check that out. And then there will be more recruitment in the future, of course, but something to keep in mind. And then lastly, I did want to talk about Change Mobility briefly, because this is the suite of programs that are working on transportation related emissions. So as we know, transportation is, almost a third of Edmonton's community greenhouse gas emissions. And when you're thinking about how to transform that to achieve our climate goals, really this, triangle demonstrates just the importance of mode shift towards active transportation like walking and cycling, and just the really great value from a low carbon perspective of those modes of transportation. But then also things like e-bikes and e-scooters have a really low carbon footprint. And then public transit and car sharing, which of course, a lot of effort at the City of Edmonton goes into as a robust transit system. So, however, even with all of these, with all of this in mind, there are some trips that still occur by car. and there will always be. So that's where the electric vehicle strategy comes into place to achieve emissions reductions in those vehicle trips. So in 2018, we passed the EV strategy, and really the purpose of this is to help Edmonton be an EV ready city. Because the world and so many jurisdictions are really transforming quite quickly towards electric vehicles. Also helping Edmontonians make it easier for them to own and operate electric vehicles in their homes. So this really includes these 6 key opportunity areas, like for example, education and marketing around myth busting, some of the misconceptions around EVs. Another good example would be public charging infrastructure that's being partnered with folks like ATCO and EPCOR around the city to get better charging infrastructure. And then consideration of regulations, for example, like bylaws that support EV-ready parking spaces in new builds. And then just briefly, like I did want to mention that there is an EV charger rebate that will be available till the end of May. So if you haven't heard about this yet or you're considering, the federal government has a rebate for electric vehicle ownership. But when it comes to EV chargers, homes and buildings are eligible for a 50% rebate. So would encourage you to check this out. You'll notice that applications close May 31st. Strongly encourage folks who are interested to submit pre-approval before that date, and then you can take a bit more of your time to plan and purchase, and you'd be eligible. There is some funds remaining for this one. And then, yeah, that's all that I had for today. There is a Lunchbox series that my colleagues are running. If you're interested in learning a bit more about some of the other activities, you can register at changeforclimate.ca/Lunchbox series. And that is all. Thank you so much, Heather.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. I think we should get you to end your screen share there,
Sure.
if you don't mind, and then we can see Danielle as well. Perfect. So, wow, the Q&A box is just lighting up. I don't think I've ever seen so many questions at one of our webinars before. You thought that might happen, and I was like, no, I'll prepare some extra questions, but we will definitely not get to my questions today because I see people in attendance today are full of questions and great questions, and also very aware of how to use the Q&A box. So I think we're getting a very informed public here. Even if they don't know everything about your strategies, they definitely know about how to ask questions on Zoom. So congrats to all of our attendees. You're a very engaged audience. So I'm going to start off with some of the most popular questions. Robert's are really topping the chart here. And then we can get into some of the other ones a little bit down the line. Question 1, so on electricity decarbonization. Does the city of Edmonton have a strategy to decarbonize the city's, meaning all electricity consumers in Edmonton, as opposed to the city of Edmonton, electricity usage? Could EPCOR be instructed to pursue a net zero strategy by the city of Edmonton? And I think we're seeing some of that in Calgary, where there are people saying, NMAX should have a net zero strategy. And so I guess a similar question here: can the city impose on EPCOR to do something of that nature? We heard in your presentation, Danielle, about the city of Edmonton's goals to convert their own buildings, but I guess this question is a little bit broader and about imposing more structures for Edmontonians at large. Who wants to jump into that one?
I can start to try to tackle something, and Lisa, please feel free to jump in and add on. So yeah, that's a great question and a big question. Maybe I'll preface my response by just saying that, as you can imagine, this strategy was developed by a team of folks and people with different expertise, and I'll be quite upfront and honest that the energy system side of things is not my area of expertise. We relied on other team members who had more knowledge of that to develop that. But that's a great question. I would say, like, right now, there's not necessarily a holistic strategy for that, like you're speaking to, but there are, obviously various, I guess, small scale things that are underway to try to transition Edmontonians' electricity supply. As far as the EPCOR question goes, that's not something that I really know a lot about. I know that there are members of our team that work quite closely with EPCOR Power on various things, and so that's maybe a great question. We also do have an advisory committee that advises city council on energy transition things, and maybe that's something that they could be an idea that could be brought forward from them. But I'm honestly not entirely sure of the best way to answer your question. It's a great question. I'm not sure, Lisa, if you had anything you wanted to add from your program's perspective. Or
I was just going to add, I think that's a really important question, and that's sort of what my impression of the renewable and resilient energy transition pathway that Danielle described is all about. So all of those actions there are working on what levers can the city use to influence a greener grid, given that so much of it's outside of our decision, our ability to decide. And I do know when it comes to EPCOR, we would have to get back to this person. So please feel free to email us, lisa.dockman@edmonton.ca. But I do know that they have adopted some fairly ambitious and aligned climate action themselves. And so you think, for example, the E.L. Smith solar farm that was recently approved by council was part of them achieving the ambition that they'd set. And I do believe part of that was to be in alignment with the city of Edmonton. So while I'm sure that there's a lot of opportunity still, and we know the grid needs to decarbonize, there's definitely some action happening.
Yeah, thanks for that. Oh, sorry, Danielle, you were going to say?
I was going to say, I picked up on something Lisa said too. She reminded me of the levers of change. So yeah, so advocacy and partnership and collaboration are one of those levers of change that we've identified. And so as we kind of go through to our gated implementation approach, that maybe is a lever that we would maybe put some focus into for that pathway.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are generally unclear. When you have a municipally controlled corporation, how much control do we actually have? And so do we have to advocate to them, or do we own them? And so that's a big question for a lot of people. And also, they're also a wire provider that's responsible to the province and reports to the province as well, along with the other wire providers. So, again, is it a matter of advocating to the province, the city, or EPCOR itself? I think that's a really great question to dive into more, and certainly something I'm happy to explore further as well. In my capacity with Solar Alberta, because the question about levers of change, who do we speak to about what, right? Who's ultimately going to make that decision at the end of the day? So that's a very good question. So I appreciate you taking some time on that. The next question up is around vehicle electrification. And Lisa, you just touched on this at the very end of your presentation. So I appreciate you doing that, but I think people would appreciate some expansion on that topic. Does the city of Edmonton have a plan for how to support the ability to pursue EV ownership without access to home charging? So example is someone living in a low-rise apartment with only street parking. What kind of charging support does the city envision garageless people having? And I know this issue came up for me as a condo owner. We had to have a negotiation within our condo as to whether they were going to basically subsidize our EV charging, or whether or not they were going to try and put that cost on us. So some people have that question and discussion with their condo boards, but others don't even have the opportunity for that conversation because they are renting, and it's just not optional. So I think that's a really good question. I'm curious what your thoughts are on making EV charging accessible to people who are maybe not homeowners or don't have a garage.
Yeah, it's a great question. And our colleague Andrea Soler is responsible for the Changed Mobility for Climate portfolio. And I think what I would say is that sort of why the EV Charger Rebate is not only for single family homeowners, why there is the criteria and availability of funds for multifamily as well as commercial. Because what we do know from research is that EV owners are charging their EVs not just at home, but also when they're out and about, whether it be, recreationally or at a shopping mall or whatever it may be. And so I think when it comes to multifamily, we want to be able to support multifamily buildings that would like to install it. But I think that's where some of that bylaw exploration or regulatory exploration work comes in that Andrea would be able to speak more to. But when it comes to new builds, there's some pretty simple things that can be done to have an EV readiness in a parking lot, for example, or in a parking garage of a condo building, in order for it to be more compatible with the EVs in the future. So I think that some of that exploratory work is how can we make it that infrastructure more accessible and cheaper to add later in new and existing homes, multifamily homes.
Yeah, and it's nice to know that the city of Edmonton is undergoing, bylaw reviews in conjunction with all of this. So there's really an opportunity there. I know Robert's suggesting a plug share, which I guess is an idea they have in Calgary. I've gone to cities in the past where we've tried to charge when we were staying in an apartment, for example. And in order to charge, you have to be a patron at a business. You can't use the chargers without basically spending. And so it's really inaccessible in some jurisdictions. So I'm curious to explore this plug share concept more and the bylaw considerations that you mentioned, Lisa, for how we can make charging more accessible. But I do know, and I see here in the responses that there are some chargers now off 124th Street. People are saying in the Q&A box, and I have chatted with folks from EPCOR who are looking at expanding and rolling out EV charging around the city. And I imagine that that's not going to be a pay for, it's probably going to be more accessible is my hope, since it's coming from EPCOR instead of an individual business. So we'll see how that goes. Good discussion. Next question up, we have Alan here. He's wondering, are there any plans to be more aggressive with a work and play where you live strategy? So introduce skinny streets and discourage needless vehicle movement, save money on street maintenance, and create stronger communities. So very local, hyper local strategies to help reduce emissions. What are your thoughts on that?
I think at the highest level, I think that is some of the work under city plan. I think, that's our MDP, of course, and that's one of the areas that they're looking at as well, as to how can we have these, tactical urbanism or really local urban developments that will help with gas emissions, as well as all the other suite of good urban benefits that come with that. I'd say too, part of so under the city plan, they're doing district plans basically. So, per kind of area of the city. And so I think there's an opportunity in there as well. They're looking at how can you tailor those types of ideas into different local areas or neighborhoods. So yes, I do think that is some of the work that is going to come out from our city plan implementation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed. Oh, sorry, Lisa.
Oh, I was just going to add that urban form and the GHG impacts of that form they dove into that quite deeply through the city plan process. So I think there's even a policy briefing on it if people were interested to check that out. But I do think that's sort of when it comes to the nodes in such a large, geographically large city, there's this idea of these centralized nodes and then building up the infrastructure and servicing in those when it comes to that urban form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has. In recent years, I've noticed some transformation in some of how the city is planning to allow more mixed use development as well. So you can have more services near where people live. In the past, of course, there was the industrial and then there was the residential, and there was no mixing of business with people. But nowadays, I think there is a lot more intention going into how we build and plan and making sure that that things are in walking distance. So it's nice to see that some of the new neighborhoods that are being developed, hopefully we can retrofit some of the older neighborhoods to have that support as well. Awesome. So here we go. And just for those of you who are not aware of our format, we usually run until 1:15 because there are always a plethora of questions. And so we hope you can stay with us till 1:15 to get into more of these awesome questions. Oh, and here's one from our Solar Alberta President, Daryl Kaminsky. Nice to see my board members on the line today. So given that ERA's energy savings for business PV component is fully committed or subscribed, is the City of Edmonton considering adding PV to the HERA program, the Building Energy Retrofit Accelerator program? Oh, I like that question a lot. Really putting you on the spot today, Lisa.
Yeah, so, you know, it's definitely under consideration, but sort of as Danielle shared, there's some steps that need to take place before we know how to change and fund the next kind of iteration of and the expansion of the programs that we have in market. So that's certainly really important to know that there's so much interest that the ERA program was fully subscribed so quickly, and really just grateful for that feedback and advice. But we hope to be able to do that in future.
Yeah. Phenomenal to see how quickly that program was subscribed for solar PV. I know the demand is there for the commercial solar. And someone once told me that the rebates we have in Edmonton sort of make up for the fact that they have more solar production capacity in Calgary, and that it kind of somehow evens out a little bit. And so I guess that's also a good reason for that question is, can we address the fact through these rebates of the fact that we are further north and we don't quite get the same sun exposure as some of the other municipalities to the south of us. So anyways, really good food for thought. Thanks for that, Daryl and Lisa, for your response. Another board member, awesome. One of our new board members, Donald, he's wondering, are Edmonton's post-secondaries eligible and enrolled in the Climate Leader program? I see Andrew Reed has already given a response, but knowing that some of our listeners are going to be auditory learners instead of visual, I would just appreciate you two diving into that as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to. They absolutely are. And actually, I believe Nate McEwen and University of Alberta were all founding members when we launched the program. And so they are, there's some amazing greenhouse gas management practices in many of our institutions. And I'm sure that I'm missing others in those 56, but that is why we use the term businesses and organizations is any entity. Every entity in the city is making decisions that impact their carbon footprint and are invited and encouraged to join the program.
Awesome. That's great news. I'm going to pull a question up because I've noticed that we've had exclusively names that would typically be associated with male identifying participants so far. And so I see a name that would likely be associated with a female identifying participant. So I'm going to pull her question up because it always irritates me when we don't have any questions from women or non-binary folks. So here we go. We've got one from Diana. She's wondering, is it correct to say that the city carbon budget is only for city expenditures, i.e. for city operations and programs? Does the city budget keep track of emissions beyond what is in the carbon budget? And I mean, we touched a bit on that in the first question today, but this is, I think, specific to this notion of the city carbon budget. And so if you guys could help us understand that lingo and what it's referring to, that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. And I can start off maybe. So, and just, yeah, carbon budget is such a new kind of field, an emerging field. We kind of call it bleeding edge because it's just at the beginning, and, as things evolve, it will likely become a more refined method. But I think really for us anyways, I think the thought around carbon budget is that it's a really useful way to help frame the urgency of the need to make changes, because it emphasizes that fact that there is a limit to how much greenhouse gases we can emit to avoid those most kind of dramatic impacts of climate change. So I would say for kind of, you can think of carbon budget kind of as like this ceiling on emissions, or kind of like a bathtub filling up with water, and it can only fill up with so much water before it overflows. And the carbon budget is what will kind of help us make decisions so that we don't overfill the bathtub, and we can find ways of start draining water from the tub. So that's kind of my analogous kind of thought to the carbon budget. And I think it is not just on city programs. It's carbon budget that was calculated is for Edmonton as a city. So it's like a community carbon budget. But I think the one thing to bear in mind is that this possibly like the specific value of the carbon budget could change as the methods get evolve and get more refined, because it is such new work, especially translating a carbon budget for a city, it's pretty new. So I'm not sure if that really helped to answer your question, but
Yeah, absolutely.
start off with that.
That's great. No, thank you for helping us understand. I think a lot of the lingo that's being used is still fairly new to some of us as well. And so we just want to make sure we're clear on we're basically comparing apples to apples, right? For another example of that is sometimes you'll hear a city is investing in solar. And that can mean two different things too. In St. Albert, it means they're literally investing in solar on their buildings. Whereas in Innisfail, it means that they provided land at a lease rate, and they're receiving a lease revenue for solar that another developer is actually profiting from. And so anyways, a lot of the lingo on all these topics is still really new to us, and different municipalities talk about these things in different ways. So it's really helpful to get a sense for where the city of Edmonton's coming from. We have a question here, and I love this question because I'm always wondering, and I'm sure Lisa's feeling quite ready for it, because we always go back and forth on this. But I've never heard of a municipality accomplishing any of their carbon neutrality goals without some level of regulation. It's the carrot and stick question, right? If you go all carrot and no stick on the builders, on the developers, are you ever going to really achieve carbon neutrality? And so we have a question here from Mark, which touches on that, which is, does the city of Edmonton have the authority to require beyond code minimums, tier 2 to 4 in the NECB? And I'll let you guys touch on that a bit, but I'll just provide some broader context, which is that, Energy Efficiency Canada has clearly stated, if we use the federal building codes as we currently are, we will not achieve our climate goals. And so if Edmonton is trying to achieve some really ambitious climate goals using those codes, how are we ever going to get there? And really, do we have the power to do anything beyond code? So this is sort of the big question on the building side of things. Who wants to jump in there? So it's definitely a touchy topic sometimes, I think, the interjurisdictional power piece.
Danielle, did you have something here, or I'm happy to swing.
Sure, Lisa, if you want to take it away, and I can always add in if there's anything.
Okay. So I think this is an interesting question because it doesn't say should we or will we. It says, do we have the authority? And that's not clear. So the municipal, the big city charter, Edmonton City Charter regulation that the government passed does provide additional authorities to the city of Edmonton relating to environment and climate. But it does seem like that does not include regulating above existing codes. It's sort of meant to complement existing regulation, not necessarily add to it. But I would say that this is something that, because that is a relatively new regulation, that is still trying to be understood and hasn't been tested in Alberta yet through either Edmonton or Calgary. So I believe the intention, and Danielle jump in, but the intention of what's within the strategy that was approved is that regulation is not off the table in the future, but that there's this suite of other programs, activities, advocacy effort, and capacity building that is meant to make progress towards these goals, and then it'd be revisited as time goes on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that's the piece that I have found most calming in these discussions over the past few months, is just the idea that we're going to start with the carrots. We'll see how far we can get. If we're making enough progress, we'll leave it at that. If not, we might need to test out some of these city charter capabilities and have that conversation with the province. And so it's good to know that this is not like the energy transition strategy ends today. We have decided it. There's going to be a continual renewal and review process throughout the 10 years is my understanding. And I take great comfort in that.
And just to maybe tag in there as well, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I mentioned this gated implementation approach so much, is exactly that policy and regulation, like regulations are one lever of change. And so we have to identify at what point maybe the time is the right time for regulation, that type of thing. And we'd be signaling that to council. So that's kind of partly why I brought up that implementation approach so much was just to reinforce that, yeah, we, things aren't necessarily off the table. So.
Yeah, and I appreciate that neither of you are going to say this, but I have the opportunity to because I'm not a city employee. But honestly, all those on the line today, if you want to see more sticks, if you want to see more regulation, if you want to see the code, the stringency go up, we're going to have to actually, speak up and say that because until the new city council in the fall hears that, until the government of Alberta hears that we want more stringent codes, until the government of Canada hears that, it's going to be hard for us to accomplish those goals. So we definitely all have to be speaking up if we want to see some of those code enhancements that are referred to in the question today. Another question here, and I see a good link here in the Q&A. So for a single family home, is there a central information hub that a homeowner can access to see the many programs available, as there appear to be many programs provided by all levels of government? Andrew has already commented, and it's nice to see your colleagues on the line today. Just as with my board members, I think we all get tickled when you guys join us for lunch, so thank you. The Edmonton programming, a lot of it is provided on the changeforclimate.ca website. And I will mention that Solar Alberta also tries very hard to keep track. We have a page on our website dedicated to financing solar. So it's not necessarily energy efficiency specific. We have some of the energy efficiency options listed there and some of the EV options as well, storage options. But we really try hard to keep track of all this. We have, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Edmonton, everybody, all their different competing and awesome programs listed. And if you see something that you hear about today or at another level of government, and you want us to update our website so that people can do a one-stop shop at solaralberta.ca, please share that information with us, because we are trying to put it all together. And I know the city of Edmonton does their best to communicate their programs, but if you're looking for provincial and federal programs as well, and curious about other municipalities, technically Solar Alberta is there for you. We just sometimes need a little help keeping up with the pace of change, because this is always a moving target. So definitely check in with us, check in with Change for Climate, and we're happy to let you know some of the new programs that are out there. All right, Corey is asking, how is the city of Edmonton going to deal with competing programs of the CLEIP and the federal, I think that meant to say SEEP probably, and the federal 0% interest loan? That's a topic you were touching on briefly, I think, at the end of your presentation, Lisa. But maybe you could explain that a bit. I think maybe there's misunderstanding that SEEP is a competing program, but actually my understanding is you guys are actually leading that program. So your pilot, at least.
Yeah, I think, so I would agree. I don't think, with the interest and importance of financing tools in this space for significant energy retrofits and renewables, I think this person's probably talking about, there was also an announcement around $40,000 interest-free loans that would be available. My understanding is that's a different program than the Greener Homes, EnterGuide, and $5,000 rebate one that I mentioned. But I'm not sure if they're on the same trajectories. So whenever the $40,000 no interest financing is available federally, we think that's fantastic. We encourage people to take advantage of that. We're guessing that there will be enough interest in SEEP then as well as and that tool for them to both be fully subscribed and supported. Also, our SEEP pilot is going to be quite small, because we are just trying to explore that pilot and learn from it in a 2-year pilot. So, and again, it's unique in a lot of ways. The fact that it's property tied is a very unique element of it. We don't know if that'll be the case with the federal one. So we do imagine there's interest for both.
Right, and we'll have to wait to see what your interest rates end up being, right? Because I don't think that's been announced yet. So I guess individual property owners will want to look at the different interest rates and see, is it close enough to the federal program that it's worth it, and is it accessible to you, and then make those decisions. But obviously, people aren't necessarily going to access their financing through both at the same time. That probably won't make, it's not a natural stacking type program, if that's the question, because that stacking makes more sense if it's a rebate type thing, right, than a loan, an interest free loan. I think we are out of time, and I feel like we could ask you guys questions all day. So I apologize. I'm going to have to cut us off here. Really want to honor the time commitment people have made, and thank you both very much for taking time to share with us today. I am going to send you all the questions that we received today as a follow-up so that you can respond to them over time as you're able. And if people want to reach out to you directly, if you could put your emails in the chat box, then they can connect with you directly for very home specific questions. But I want to thank everybody who's attended our webinar this afternoon. I encourage you to stay tuned, follow Solar Alberta on social media, and sign up for our newsletter on the bottom of your on the bottom of our website, solaralberta.ca. You can also become a member of Solar Alberta to receive special member bulletins and a wide variety of other benefits. We often post updates to municipal, provincial, federal programs in our member bulletins as well. So that's another way you can get access to some of this great information. Of course, I want to thank City of Edmonton Change for Climate again for sponsoring us today and for participating and sharing so much information with us. We look forward to hosting you all again in the very near future. Hope you can join us next Thursday as we look at what's happening in Fort Chipewyan. Thanks and have a wonderful day.